Hi there, how's it going? So we ran a workshop last week called Systema Applied, and we were looking at the application of Systema from a self-defense and a combative perspective. At the end of the session we had some sparring going on, which is a normal thing. Most of our sessions end up with some sort of sparring or free play type work, and I like this type of work because it always throws up questions. So I'm going to address a couple of those questions today fairly quickly because time is limited on the vlog. Of course, if you want to get more detailed instructional content, click the join button below and that will show you how you can join our member channel and get access to all our uploads. I think we've got about 40 uploads now on things ranging from solo exercises to ground movement. We're just finishing up a series on knife work at the moment. But let's get back to our topic of sparring. Now, your conventional sparring, what you usually see, most usually from a sports perspective, is people put on gloves and headgear and they have this exchange that might be more or less intense, or people are working grappling, similar kind of thing. You don't need so much gear with grappling because obviously you can go more intense with grappling with less risk of percussive injury anyway. But from a Systema perspective, we can tweak that model in order to make it a little more adaptable and a little more fitting in with what we do. And I came up with this idea of the 10 points of sparring, which are these 10 variables. You think of things like speed, you think of things like levels of contact, levels of resistance, the environment, any gear or equipment you might be using, and so on and so on. Each of these can be adjusted, a bit like a graphic equalizer on a stereo, if you're old enough to remember those. So, for example, you might want to work slower, you bring the speed down, but you can increase the levels of contact and so on. So I explain those in detail in my books, particularly Systema Self-Defense, which talks about applying that work to develop self-defense skills, and also, of course, in my latest book, Systema Instructor, which is a complete guide to setting up a Systema class, how you promote it, how you run it, how you work out your syllabus, how you develop training drills, and so on and so on. And of course that applies not just to Systema but any martial art. The principles are universal. So we have these 10 points, these 10 variables, and what I'm going to talk about today initially is the most important one of all, which is what is the purpose of the sparring. Because quite often I find that people do sparring because that's what you do in martial arts, you spar. And you know, more or less it does vary. Some people will use that to develop attributes, so you can develop distance and timing, your technique and that kind of thing. Other times people just enjoy getting the gear on or getting on the mat and having a bit of a tussle. That's all fine, but you have to be clear what the purpose of the sparring is, and both people have to agree on that as well. Once you know the purpose of the sparring, you can start setting and adjusting all your other parameters. So if, for example, it's skill acquisition, you want to learn a particular type of lock or holds, or locks or holds, then that's going to be the focus on the sparring. You're probably not going to put on boxing gloves and start like this. So the purpose of the sparring will determine how it works and how it looks. Now, things that you need to agree between each person involved are these things like the speed, the level of contact and everything else. I'm sure everyone's had a similar experience. I remember I was 18, 19, I've not been training very long in Kung Fu anyway, and we had some guys come down who wanted to spar, and we agreed we'd be doing like boxing type work, hands only. And it went on for a little bit, then suddenly I got an axe kick in the face which actually cracked on my sort of nose and cheek down here. So I learnt a bit of a lesson that day. Just be careful who you spar with and be ready for anything. But it goes the other way as well. I've had people who want to go full speed and full bore with the knife. They want to make everything as real as they can, and then they complain that you've hit them too hard. You know, so you have to determine, is this sparring or is it a competition? That's the first thing. All parties involved have to be aware of what the limits are, what the parameters are, and be willing to work within them. Otherwise you're suddenly turning sparring into a competition, or a competition into a fight. And then of course, coming on from that, if we're talking about the function of the sparring is to allow people to practice some kind of technique in a sort of slightly more live environment. I should explain as well, you can train things as a drill, right? So we'll have a set thing. Someone's going to throw in a punch and I'm going to practice my step in and takedown, or someone's going to grab me here and I'm going to practice my escape and then lock his arm up. So those are what we call drills. They can still be, or there can still be an element of free play in those, but we're sort of telling people what to do. Not to the extent of you have to hit me like this in this particular certain way, but nonetheless you know what is happening. That gives you a chance to practice that skill. But even if you put that into free work, if the aim of the sparring is to start learning to apply locks in a more free environment, then it doesn't do much good if both people go like this. You're not going to lock me, you're not going to lock me, and nothing happens, right? We can get around that to some extent once we get into the testing area, and what I like to do with that is give people a particular goal or aim. So it could be, we have a thing where I say you've got 2 minutes in order to try and restrain the other person, in order to lock them up and restrain them. Then the other person is quite within their rights to act like this, because part of the skill that person has to learn is not just the technical aspect of applying the lock here, but how to get into that position in the first place. So in that sense, that action is fine. If we're in the earlier stage of a drill or working more free, then this isn't so useful. The other thing we need to consider is when we're looking at sparring, often we're looking at extending the experience. The testing thing aside, what we're normally looking to do, as I say, is get this exchange going where we can both benefit from the experience. Now, in real actual use, obviously depending on the situation, generally we're trying to deal with the situation and conclude it in the shortest time possible, because the longer it goes on, the more variables come into play. So we might be doing that verbally, we might be doing that by removing ourselves from the situation, or we might be doing that by taking direct action. But nonetheless, particularly if we're taking direct action, we need that to be direct and in and quick and finished. You know, we're not looking at testing the person out, we're not looking at stepping back 3 times and telling them to stop or anything else. We're taking action, and hopefully that resolves the situation satisfactorily. When we're exchanging, we're looking for this backwards and forwards, and often we call this play as well. And again, that can be one reason for sparring, is we play. And the better that you know people, the more you can do that kind of work, because that risk of the cheap shot or someone suddenly switching the rules tends to go out the window. But also, when you work with people you know and trust, you find if that's the parameter of the drill, to hit heavy, you can hit heavy and no one takes it personally. No one's ego gets bruised. Maybe the body does a bit. So in that sense, that allows us to work more realistic, or at least with more realistic levels of contact and speed and everything else. Now at some point, and that the question came up at the workshop, at some point you might be working with someone who's more experienced than you, or you might just be having a bad day or anything else. At some point you get the question, why is what I'm doing not working? So this is where I say I like this stuff, because this is where the questions come up, and the questions is where you learn things from a teacher's perspective and the students. So what we're looking to be for the learning state is kind of on the edge of comfortable and confident with what we're doing, but it still needs to be challenging as well. If everything is really easy and works all the time in your training, then I would suggest you need to reevaluate your training. If nothing ever works at all and you're constantly getting beaten all the time, well, you might need to evaluate your training or how you're approaching it, but it could be that you just need to ease back a bit, develop the particular skills or attributes you need, then you can start bringing the pressure levels back up again. So that's a constant ongoing thing. So if, for example, you might be grappling with someone and you find it's difficult to get anything working, then you think, what aspect of what I'm doing is not working? Is it difficult for me to work against the other person's tension? Is the speed overwhelming me a little bit? Those kind of things. Then I can go to that button on my graphic equalizer. Let's say it's all going too fast and I can't take it in. So we can say to the other person, well, can we just bring the speed down a bit? That's better, now I can start, now I can start working and applying that. Once I've got fluent in that particular ability, now we can bring the speed back up again. So in this way, your sparring is, or your general sparring anyway, is a kind of diagnostic. It tells you what you need to work on, and this is where a good sparring partner or partners are invaluable. They're really the best bit of training equipment you can have. I've been very lucky over the years to train with people like Rob Murray and David Nicholson, and of course my students and other friends. You're able to spar and train and do things to a level, as I said before, where there's no ego, but at the same time people aren't going to be nice to you. They're not going to let you off. And I think this is really the main question I put at the head of this. What makes a good sparring partner? I would say understanding all of those things that I'm just talking about, but also you want to work with people who can pinpoint your weaknesses but not necessarily take full advantage of them. If we say, for example, I'm not very good at taking hits, and we're doing our sparring and my partner just taps me a little bit here and there, but they don't really register, they're not really sinking in, I might think I'm doing really well, so I carry on doing my work. A good sparring partner, an honest sparring partner, will just put those hits in a little more, just to let me know, right, oh yeah, I can feel you got me there. So I either need to work on the ability to take hits or the ability to defend myself a little better, or so on. A bad sparring partner is going to see that weakness and just go bang and try and destroy you. That doesn't achieve anything for anyone. All it does is it's a dominance issue. Sometimes people like to establish dominance. You should be the other way around. If you're much better than your partner and you're sparring with them and you find it easy, then do something to handicap yourself a little bit, you know? Put one arm behind your back, close your eyes, make things a little more challenging for yourself, because that's where you will learn as well. And this way is nice. This is one thing I like about the Systema approach, is that means people of all levels. The person who's only done 2 lessons can be sparring with someone who's been here for 10 years, and each person can adjust accordingly. And of course the good experienced partner will pinpoint the weaknesses of that other person, and it could be vice versa as well, right? Because none of us, none of us is immune to being hit or being swept or choked or anything. So that way the sparring session becomes a progressive learning tool rather than just a method of bullying and dominance. So as briefly as I've been able to, that's our general view of sparring, and I hope I've given you some ideas that you can go away and use to tweak your sparring to get the most out of it. As I said, to get access to all our exclusive instructional content and also direct access in terms of asking questions and getting a video response, then click the join button for details of the member channel. If you do have any other comments or suggestions, then please do leave them below. It's always nice to see sensible comments anyway, and do click like and subscribe. Take care.